One. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of Health Hangouts with Amanda. Today, we are talking to Ryan, who's a long time friend of mine. We met back in 2008 through our undergrad program. And Ryan, just want to thank you so much for being here, for donating your time to help out with this project and speak out to those who might be listening and who might need help. The purpose of this video, what we might call video podcast or video program, is to be able to just connect with others who aren't asking for help or don't really know how to support themselves, their loved ones, or people in their communities. So we're all struggling in various ways, but we all have similar feelings about those various ways that we're struggling about what's going on in the world. So Ryan, thanks so much for being here, and it's so nice to see you. I know I just saw you back in February. I took a trip out to Calgary, and then basically within 10 days of getting home, we went into lockdown. So
Right.
and I've been largely inside ever since then. Aside from, like, you know, maybe going to Tim Hortons or whatever. It's certainly difficult. But I just want to, if you could introduce yourself and then I'll just ask you a bunch of questions.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Amy. So my name is Ryan Kirkby, and I met Amy in the addictions counseling program at the University of Lethbridge, and so we've known each other since then, since 2008. I'm currently a master's student. I'm studying counseling psychology through the University of Athabasca, and I am currently not working because of the pandemic. I have asthma, and then my immune system has not been great the last couple months, so I'm currently not working, and just laying low, living the slow life. And I'm happy to be here for the health hangout, Amy.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you're here too. And part of this too, although I'm hopeful that it's helpful for others who watch these videos, but also it's helpful for me to be able to connect with my friends, because, you know, I laugh about that, but it's hard. It's getting harder to not be able to see people and things. So this is part of maintaining my wellness. And it's kind of great, because even though I saw you in February, the like, how often do I get out to Calgary? It's like once a year.
Yeah.
If that. So it's really great to be able to see you again in this capacity, because we don't often do this. So that's a real benefit for me. You did
Same.
say, yeah, that's nice. You did say, you know, you're living the slow life here. And before we even came on, you were kind of saying, you know, I'm pretty good at living the slow life. And so can you just tell us about what this has been like for you? And you said, like, you're not working because of the pandemic, and you are a student also. And I just wonder what life has been like since we had to start staying at home about, when was that? About a month and a half ago now? 5 weeks maybe.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share, Amy. So as I mentioned, I'm like, I feel like I'm pretty good at living the slow life. So I think a little bit of context for me around when the pandemic started. I was experiencing burnout symptoms back in December and January, and so for me, what that looks like is exhaustion and depression symptoms. So this is probably a third time that I've been seriously affected by burnout in my life. And again, when I say burnout, it's depressive symptoms. So I noticed that my thinking gets really dark. But then I also I can also get really what's the word I'm looking for? Like, just I don't want to do anything. Like I can't, and I almost can't do anything, and I'm really sensitive to stress. So that was happening for me a couple months before the pandemic situation started. So, and I started to come out of it, like when I saw you in February. I was coming out of it, and we talked about that a bit. And then by March, I was coming out of it even more, but I still had this a certain level of exhaustion happening. So when we were, invited to, self-isolate, reduce contact, social distancing, stay home. I was fully on board for that. Like I really just needed to not do anything. So the first couple weeks, I spent a lot of time at home by myself, and I was just resting. I actually did a lot of sleeping, to be honest.
Mhm.
So in some ways, that first few weeks were, I'd say, a little bit like recovery for me from some of those burnout symptoms that I was having. At the
Mhm.
same time, I think what's interesting to note about that time is that in the past, sometimes doing nothing in the past when I'm like that is not good for me. Like when I get really dark and I just don't want to move. I don't want to do anything. Sometimes it makes it worse, and that has happened in the past where if I just want to sleep all the time, it makes it makes it worse. So it's actually better for me if I'm getting up and getting out and doing things. Um, but this time, I was aware that no, my body just needs to rest, and I just need to sleep. And my symptoms don't seem to be getting worse. They seem to be getting a bit better. So the fact that I was able to just rest for the first few weeks of the pandemic was really great for me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's how that started out. Um,
Yeah, I wonder, Ryan, for you, you said, you know, things seem to get worse if I'm sleeping too much, or if I mean, this is my paraphrase of what you said, but I wonder
mhm.
what your perception is as to why that is for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think, like in the past, when things have gotten worse, I think part of what's happening for me on the inside is um, like I think part of the experience of depression, or part of the experience of the darkness that I'm calling it the darkness,
Mhm.
is like there's no hope, there's no point, um, maybe, and also there's like maybe a dimension of like I don't have purpose, I don't have meaning, um, things like that. So if I am if I'm lying around in that,
Mhm.
um, I think it can be easy to kind of get stuck in that world in consciousness, and almost like if I start thinking about it, and like ruminating, or like I think the word wallowing kind of captures it. Like, when
Mhm.
we get a feeling or a certain mood and we start to wallow in that feeling or that mood, it's not like we're open to things changing. We're not like necessarily flexible in wanting things to change or open to things changing. It's more like we're kind of like sitting in the shit, but like not in a
Mhm.
good way. We're not open. We're like almost wanting to be in it.
Mhm.
So I think the times that doing nothing was bad for me is it was like that.
And what was for you, like, I think this is just an excellent point of conversation, because there's so many people who are experiencing right now that slothful kind of feeling, like not wanting to do very much, not caring very much,
Mhm,
um, greater anxiety, greater depressive symptoms, not really knowing what to do, and not really caring to do anything,
mhm,
right? Or to show up, or to take any responsibility. And so I love that you're talking about this right now. And I wonder, for you, like, what is the payoff? Because, like, I know what it feels like to get into those places also, and I can share what I think the payoff is. But what's a payoff for you to stay in that dark place, even though we might know that this is not healthy for me?
mhm. Um, well, I think like what comes up is it's almost like there's something that I guess I have a hard time answering that question about payoff, but I
Mhm.
know that it's like there's something that happens where we like to hold on to pain. We hold on to our emotional pain, and there's something maybe familiar about that. Um, and maybe in that familiarity, there's, I don't know, like comfort or some kind of soothing or sense of control. Whereas, like, for me, like, if I'm feeling like I don't have purpose, like I don't have meaning, in order for me to start to feel like I have purpose and I have meaning, I have to let go of that pain to feel something different. I have to be open and willing to have a different experience that is unfamiliar, which is, moving into something that is unfamiliar can be vulnerable and uncomfortable. And it's okay. So, and I have an example of this that happened last night. So I was like up late, couldn't sleep last night. I watched a movie. It was a good movie. We finished at like midnight. I went to bed. I kind of like half dozed for a bit until about 1:30, 2 o'clock. And I was like, okay, I can't sleep. I'm going to get up. I'm going to have a snack, have a glass of water. I sat on the couch. And then my phone was sitting there on the table. And I'm like, okay, so, do I want to get on my phone and start like getting on the internet and like looking at memes and like reading the news or whatever? And there was a moment where I was aware, okay, Ryan, like, there's this thing that happens for you that that when you get on your phone late at night with the bright light of the phone, that it kind of just keeps you awake and it doesn't put you into a state where you actually want to sleep. So you have a choice right now. You could just go back to bed and lie in bed and try and sleep again, or you could get on your phone and look at some stuff and distract yourself, whatever. And I was aware in that moment and I picked up my phone, and picking up my phone felt, it felt familiar, and it felt comfortable, and it felt like routine because I do it so frequently. And there was something that felt good about that. But then there was this other experience inside that was like, and this doesn't feel great because I know that the phone is going to keep me up a bit later. And what I really need is sleep. So, it's interesting, this like dance that we can have happen inside sometimes. And, I don't want to shame myself for picking up the phone and getting on the internet and like reading about whatever the hell I was reading about last night. I don't even remember. It's not even relevant. But just being in that process, I don't want to shame myself for engaging in that process again. But I think the fact that there was a degree of having a conversation inside, and there was a degree of awareness as well. And so, tonight, if that same thing happens, I can choose to, pick up my phone, or I can choose to try and sleep. Depends on what I want. And now that I've had this conversation with you, maybe, who knows, maybe I'll like want to just try and sleep, because I know that that, and I know that Amy would probably want what's best for me, but that she also wouldn't shame me for picking up my phone if I really wanted to, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know, I love it. So really what I'm hearing is that there's like so there's this unconditional acceptance of what is, but there's also this understanding that you have to accept the consequences of your choices. Right? So you're noticing that, when you pick up the phone, there's familiarity. And for anybody who's listening to this, this is not just like this one example. This can be extrapolated over like many, many, many examples and types of behaviors. We do something that's familiar and comforting, but we know that it's not going to aid us in being healthier in that moment. In fact, it might aid us in, harming ourselves or in some way. So what's beautiful, Ryan, in what you said is that there's this unconditional acceptance and openness, like the not shaming yourself. I think that's a big deal, because oftentimes we just, we will self-deprecate, and we'll call ourselves names, and we'll be quite mean to ourselves based on our choices. And it's like, well, like I used to do that too, but there's absolutely, and if someone wants to argue with me, that's fine. There's no value in shaming oneself. If you want to change something, the greatest way to do that is by loving, right? And there's this There's this whole, I don't know what to call it, like a parable or whatever, something that stuck with me for a long time.
Okay, yeah.
Is that the have you heard the sun and the moon were having an argument? You
No,
heard
I don't
that
know
one?
this.
No?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't really know how it goes, but this is my
Okay,
version.
okay,
So the sun and the wind, the sun and the wind are having an argument. Okay, I
okay.
got it now.
Yeah.
And they're pointing down to earth, and they're like, I bet you I can get that guy to take off his jacket quicker than you. And the wind is so arrogant. He's like, yeah, for sure. I can beat you. I can beat you for sure. And the sun is like, fine, you go first. And he blows and blows and blows and blows. And he's like furiously trying to get this guy to take his jacket off. And the guy just hangs on his jacket tighter. And then the sun comes out, and guess what happens? The guy takes off his jacket because it's warm. So the way I see this is like, we can combat things with warmth way more than shame and conflict and forcing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so that's whenever I think of something in my life where I start to be really hard on myself, or like mean to myself, or like whatever it is, I'm like, okay, like that's the wind pushing
Mhm.
me, and I'm not going to get well in that. Let's just
Mhm.
be kind and see what happens.
I
And it
love that.
works. It works.
I
Like
love
every
that
time.
analogy. It's so good.
Yeah. Isn't that
Well,
great?
and and as you were just before you started telling that story, I was also just aware, thinking about the other thing that happens for me is that, like, if someone is gonna try and force me to do something, I'm gonna dig my heels in,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's around like some of these things that I feel should be under my control in my personal life. Like if someone is gonna shame me about my phone usage, or what time I go to bed, or like not getting 8 hours of sleep a night. If someone is going to get into some kind of rant or
Mm-hmm.
shaming about that, I'm gonna dig my heels in and be like, fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't get to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't always say those things outwardly outside, um, but inside that's my experience. And I think that, you know, deep down, like in those experiences, even last night when I was up late and I couldn't sleep, what I was looking for was some type of control. Like I was, struggling to get to sleep. It was like 2 in the morning, 2:30,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I guess I could have picked up a book and did some reading or something, but um, I think like having a sense of agency, having a sense of control over my experience is really important. And I think that's also important to acknowledge in that behavior when I did pick up the phone, is that, I mean, I think it's very human. All of us have this thing inside where we need to have a sense of control over our lives, over what is happening with us, a sense of agency over that. So I think it's important to just recognize how human that is.
Yeah, and it's so much more effective when we are consenting to a change in behavior than if we're feeling pushed into it. Even if if it's us pushing ourselves into it and we're not really consenting to that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I know that sometimes when I force myself to do things, like sometimes it's effective, but if I'm being mean, it's not at all. But sometimes we do want to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. We do want our counselors or our friends or our family to support us in pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. So it's like, the question is for me is like, where's the line
Mm,
where we go like, screw you, and or okay, I hear what you're saying, and or yeah, you're totally right, I need to change that behavior
mhm.
for my benefit. So because that's why people go to counseling, is we go and we say, okay, I need some help with this thing, and then the
Yeah.
counselor goes, okay, well, here are some options, and we go, oh no, I'm just going to do it myself, and I'm not going to do your homework, and I'm not going to do this and that. And unfortunately what we often see is nothing changes.
Mhm.
Right. So I guess my question is, even for myself and for you, but where's the line where we start to listen?
Mhm.
Like, how does that happen?
Well,
We
it's a,
start to
it's a
listen and we actually start changing things.
It's a great question. I like the question. You know, it makes me think about like some friends that I have, and including you, Amy, that
Mm.
and I think the term loving challenge, it brings up the term loving challenge for me. So there's a friend coworker that I have that she was really great at providing loving challenges, and there was no agenda on her part, but I think that it seemed like what she was really tapping into was like a sense of connection with me and how she knows me, and
Mm.
how um, how she knows that I know what's good for me, and how she knows how I know it's like none of her business about what I do, but that
Mhm.
because she cares about me, she would really love it if, you know, if I did what was good for me. But even if I chose not to, that caring would still be there.
Mhm.
And so just thinking about this particular person and this term loving challenge, I mean, that's one thing. When I have people in my life that when they're listening to me talk, and I can tell that no matter what, they're going to love me. And maybe we're talking about me trying a different behavior. Um, I think just being in that space for me is, I think is helpful, because when I'm in that space and I see someone cares about me and they want to see the best of me, it kind of makes me want to kind of be my best self too. So, or to like love myself, or to like nurture myself, or like try something new, if that is what nurturing looks like, or if that's what love looks like. Um, but that, but that's not always the case, I think, which is interesting, because I
Mhm.
feel like in my life I have those moments and I have those people in my life, and I also have the other side where I'm like grasping at control for certain things,
Mhm.
or I feel like I need to dig my heels in, So it's so interesting, because it's like I'm dancing with both. I have to dance with both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so there's an element of connection in that that would promote you to change your behavior. So it's not just for you. Like sometimes I think we
Mm,
can't see the benefit for our own lives, but we see the benefit of connecting with another person. So if we do these
mm,
things, then we facilitate greater connection with another person.
mm, mhm,
Um, so that's kind of how I'm relating to what you're saying. Like if I go
mhm,
back and I think about my counseling experience in my 20s when I was really sick in my eating disorder. I remember like I had no desire whatsoever to change anything for myself.
mhm,
In fact, my desires were to stay sick and get high, right?
mhm,
And so I continued to go and see my counselor week after week after week for years
mhm,
because I wanted to see her. Like I wanted to go there, I wanted to see her, and I wanted to tell her that I had done well. And that like back then it was like I really wanted to be accepted and loved and supported for things that were healthy for me because I
mhm,
knew that being in my addiction was not healthy for me, but it started out that I just actually wanted to see her
mhm,
and have that connection because there was so much connection in my life that was lacking in this way.
mm,
I've said this before, but the best way that I can kind of describe my relationship with her was like she taught me. I'm careful not to, offend anybody out there, but I think there's different kinds of love. Okay, I'll just preface this and say like I
mhm,
have known various kinds of love with various kinds of people my whole life.
mhm,
But when I was really sick and I didn't know how to love myself, she taught me what love was
mm,
when I was so lost. So she was a mirror for me in helping me to love myself. So
mm,
she taught me how to do that
mm,
because I didn't know how. And there were, lots of people who loved me in my life, but it's like, well, I love you. How can you treat yourself so poorly? I love you. Like, you're so valuable. And it's like, that didn't help me. It was like, I appreciate that. However, I just wanted to have that connection with her. So me getting well in those years was not about me getting well.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually about connecting and
Mm.
having someone mirror back this ability to love myself. Right. And it took years. And after a while, something like neurobiologically started to change for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was motivated to modify my behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of all of it, I was successful in becoming sober from my eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I'm like, oh, I'm all fine. We're always
Yeah.
in recovery
Yeah.
from addiction. But that's what I kind of hear you saying in my own way, is like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not always about us wanting to get well. Oftentimes, like, we don't care about getting well,
Mm-hmm.
but we can use the strength and love that somebody gives us and internalize it and actually do well, because we do this on the other end too. If someone
Mm-hmm.
says that we're stupid over and over and over, we're going to internalize that and we're going to feel that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it depends on how we feed our minds and our emotions.
I really like
What
that.
do you think? Yeah.
I love that, Amy. I love that story. You sharing your experience. I can definitely relate in the sense that a similar process happened with me and my therapist, like not so long ago, from 2015 to halfway through 2017.
Mm-hmm.
2017? Yeah, 2017. Yeah, there was like a period of, unconditional acceptance, caring, gentleness, um, and I would go back to her, and we would meet weekly, either in person or over the phone. More often than not, it was over the phone. And that process was so important for me. It was so important to do that despite the fact that I was struggling with mental health stuff, or I was, struggling with shame, or struggling with vulnerability. And what's amazing and what's interesting now is that I think I'm becoming more aware of the fact that what has occurred from going through that process is what I talked about earlier about shame, is that I am unwilling to shame myself. I will not shame myself anymore, because I did that for years, years and years. And I grew up in a family system where shame, the experience of shame, whether it was shaming, whether it was like overt, or if it was just like this thing that was not talked about, and you just kind of saw it in nonverbal behavior, it was so present in family dynamics, and not just my immediate family, but extended family as well. So, growing up in a family system really wired me for that, really wired me for shame, and to internalize things, internalize messages about myself, or internalize messages and make them about myself. Um, and so after going through that process, I think, even though I still struggle, there's still a process of struggle. What I've come out with is this thing where I can say that I love myself, and I'm unwilling to shame myself, which feels pretty good.
Well, absolutely. And was it tough for you to get to that point?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, just as you ask that question, what comes up is all of the interactions that I had with my therapist. And I don't want to call her my therapist. I want to call her by her name, but I don't want to out her. Because she was really showing up for me in a very human way. She was showing up as herself. This wasn't just a professional. This is a human that I got to know over the course of years. That every time we had a session, every time I went to her, I was I was showing up with a certain level of vulnerability, and I think what I was really doing many times was showing up with my shame. And I was saying, you know, whether it was in person or a phone call, I was showing up and I was like, okay, here, this is my shame today. And then she would just be there with me with that. And then maybe she would like kind of help me to start to see how I was shaming myself, or how I was making something about me that wasn't really about me. And it started to help me to kind of like let go of that thing, the shame that I was bringing to her each session. And it was like over the course of 2.5 years, I just like started to, every time I let go of some shame, and I moved into a place of being willing to experience my humanness, to experience who I am without shame. And that was so healing to have that happen. Just to know that, and to experience that there's people out there that aren't going, that they won't shame me, that they will see me for my humanity. They'll see me for the things that I'm great at, the things that I'm skilled at, and they'll see me for the things that I'm not so good at, and that you know, things where I need some practice, or some areas where I really screw up. Like maybe I've screwed up, you know, I made a mistake or multiple mistakes. But to see that from a place of acceptance and from perspective of humanity was just so healing. So I carry that inside now. I carry that thing of like, you know, I'm going to help you let go of your shame here if you want, you know, you don't have to, but we can talk about it if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for your vulnerability here today. It's super wonderful and helpful, and this is why, well, not why, but a big reason why I love you so much is that whenever we connect, anytime we connect, this happens, this dynamic right here.
Yeah.
And it's just so unfolding and natural, and it's just so, like, so loving, you know. And I just want to say thank you for that. You know, I remember when we first started becoming friends in 2008, and at that time I was I'm trying to remember all the things that were going on around that time, but I wasn't super well, you know, but I masked it. I thought I masked it well, and I had a very low self-confidence at the time, that, you know, I'd have my backpack on and I would park my car in like a church parking lot down by, where was it? Dairy Queen.
Yeah, by Dairy Queen. Yeah.
And I'd be like walking to the university, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, people are going to judge the way you're walking, or people are going to judge this and that, and you're so stupid. And I would actually say these things to myself, right? And I would trip over my own feet because I was so anxious about what people would think about the way I was walking. And even though, like, I tried to put this mask on, like I had everything figured out, and, you know, I was this university student, smart and all this stuff, but I didn't see myself in that at all. And there was a lot of shame that I carried around in reference to the behaviors that I engaged in reference to, like, there was a lot of codependency issues at the time, and arguably so, there are still codependency issues that I struggle with in my life. But if somebody was mad at me, I was so shameful, like, and destroyed about that, like, I did something so wrong. And even though it might have been that I didn't really do something so wrong, I stood up for what I believed in, or was my truth, yet I still went to this place of, like, I'm a terrible person because I have this truth, and so-and-so doesn't like it. And so I'd be like walking down the street, just like enmeshed in my pain around how terrible of a person it was, not to mention worried about what Joe Blow behind me was thinking about as I was walking. Like, it was so narcissistic that I was so stuck in this place of, like, everyone is thinking about me, and they likely weren't. And so through my therapy and my healing at the time, I had to actually remind myself, like in those moments where my brain was just spinning and spinning and it's like, yeah, you must be a horrible person because how possibly could you have said this to this person, and how could you have, if I was like late for class, oh, you're a horrible person because you can't be on time. And believe me, for those of you who know me, I can't be on time very well. We know that. But and so in those moments that I was telling myself that I was such a bad person, I had to intervene and say, okay, what's your evidence of that? Like, tell me how that is actually true. And that's what started the healing process for me, to be able to stop myself from saying those things and saying, whoa, 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 like, let's put a spin on that and saying it a different way. Like, okay, you're 5 minutes late for class. Well, you're a terrible person because you can't time manage. How about you didn't do a great job time managing today. However, let's look at what you can do differently if you want to be on time. And if you don't want to be on time, then don't be on time. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a shame cycle in that.
Yeah.
So what's coming up for you as I say all of that?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of empathy for Amy back then. And, I didn't know that was your daily experience back then. And it just like, yeah, I feel empathy for that. And it makes me want to like go back in time and give Amy from back then a big hug. Cause it's so painful to be in that place. And clearly you weren't doing anything wrong. But
Not
I know,
overly, aside from like learning from mistakes, I suppose, but just being a human being.
yeah, being a human being, like parking your car by Dairy Queen, walking to class, doing your thing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I know what that's like, to be in that place of, what I would call, that process where you're like, okay, what are they thinking? What's that person thinking of me? Well, that person just looked over this way. They look at me. They're worrying about what I'm wearing? Like, how do I look? Like, I'm worried about how I look. Like, there's this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what that's like. Like, for me, the term that I like to use is hyper self-consciousness. I felt like I was hyper self-conscious for years, up until I was probably 29, 30, where I started to come out of it. And that can be so painful. And yes, I use the word narcissistic, and I agree that there's a narcissistic quality about it. And I think another term that can be helpful to describe it is absorbed, like self-absorbed, but not in a. But then again, using those terms, I don't want to pathologize that process, because that process, I think, is natural when we've been shamed, or when we have internalized shame. So I think that when we learn to internalize shame, or literally if we are just born, if shame is transmitted to us when we are born. So in my experience, and I'll give just a quick story about this, is that we can literally be born with certain patterns, legacies, which can be emotional. And we literally inherit them from our family members. So maybe from a mother when we are in utero. So an example is, my mom's sister, my aunt, who I never met, she died the year before I was born. I was conceived, I believe, 2 or 3 months after she died. My aunt died. She was 21. She had epilepsy. She drowned in the bathtub. It was a really tragic accident, and it really affected the whole family. It was this huge grief thing that I learned about later as an adult. And so when I was, this was probably like 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing a lot of learning around intergenerational trauma, and a lot of exploration around healing ancestral legacies, things that we are given to us from our families. And I discovered that, and I was aware that I had been carrying a heavy heart since I was a child. I had this thing in me where my heart felt heavy, and it had always felt heavy. And as I started to explore it, it started to loosen. And there were weeks where I would just kind of like be aware of this thing moving. And then I started to do, I think what happened was I started to have some dreams. And then a day came where I was with my mom at her house, and I asked her about my aunt who had died. And she started telling me stories about my aunt, Georgina, who died. And as she told me the stories, all this grief started to come out. And I just started weeping as she was telling me the stories. I wasn't sobbing, making noise, but there was just like tears coming and all this grief coming out of my heart. And as it was coming out, I recognized that the grief wasn't mine, that it was like my family's grief. It was grief that the people around me were holding when I was in the womb. So literally, when I was in my mother's womb, growing, I was growing up in a context and environment where someone had just died, and there was a lot of grief and a lot of sadness. And as a baby, I was born with that, but it never got talked about, and it never got released until that moment 5 or 6 years ago when I asked my mom about my aunt who had died. And then it came out, and then I didn't have this heaviness in my heart anymore. And I realized that I've been carrying my family's grief. So I think the same thing can happen with shame, that when we're in the womb, when we're young, that literally these things can be transmitted to us. It's like we just absorb it. And then it ends up in our bodies as emotional energy. So if we're born with shame, not of any fault of our own, it's just there. And then we go through this process of being self-conscious and worrying about, is it me? What's wrong with me? Yeah, maybe that's self-absorbed, but maybe it's also not your fault. Maybe I didn't do anything to start this process of self-absorption. Maybe it's just, maybe it was just given to me somehow, So I think that's important to consider also, that, yeah, on a certain level, there can be a degree of narcissism, or maybe indulging in a self-image. That I would say that's narcissism, indulging in our self-image. Maybe there's self-absorption. You think everything is about us, but maybe some of that is just like it's just happening. So that's kind of what comes up for me as we're talking about shame and self-consciousness and walking around the world with pain. It's a difficult experience.
Absolutely. And it's so hidden too. We identify with this, but we might not know what it is or where it came from or what it means. And we deal with it the best way we know how to. And oftentimes we don't have the tools to do that. So when we think about, how so many people, they do walk around day in and day out, and they mask it so well. A lot of people mask it really well. A lot of people don't. But like, if there was some advice that you could give to people watching this video about taking steps toward, I don't want to use the word resolve, because I think that it's a process, but facing the pain to unravel it. Like, what would that advice be to starting the healing process?
It's a good question. I mean, well, I think one is like, trust yourself. If you feel inside that there's something that needs to be explored, trust that. If there's something inside that's telling you to do something, to take a step towards healing, really consider that. But also, something that's been really powerful for me personally is to be gentle. So it doesn't have to be, we don't have to have a complete transformation overnight. It doesn't have to be a huge step to fix ourselves. Like, it can be a baby step. And I think for me, gentleness, when I'm being gentle with myself, sometimes it looks like baby steps.
And if I can add to that in my own way, it's also being in your truth. And sometimes we might say, well, I don't know who I am, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what my truth is. And I think in all of us, we have an inner knowing, even if we don't want to listen to it, of what truth is. And if we don't know how to listen to that or know how to access it, we can certainly start talking about these things in a vulnerable way, and then we can access it that way. Right? Like Ryan, what you said earlier about, oh, maybe now that we've had this conversation, I might reconsider picking my phone up tonight to stay awake later or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to truth, there's this connection, this internalized connection. And when I think about something like addiction, for example, somebody might say, oh, like just like I did, oh, well, this is my truth and I'm gonna do whatever I want. This and this and that. And it wasn't, because even though I projected that out to the world, what was really happening was I just wanted to feel better. And I knew that it was hurting me, but I was doing it anyway. And so I knew it wasn't my truth, but I was just like full of crap in front of everybody else to get my way and to get my fix.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between, us thinking that something is good for us when we know it's not and doing so.
Yeah.
And knowing something's not healthy for us and choosing to do it differently and facing the pain of letting that go. And so the truth aspect was huge for me to get well, of being able to honor that honestly. And I did have to let go of the vices that I was like so desperately hanging on to, as though I would die without them. And that's my addition to how we start the healing journey.
That's cool, Amy. I know that's a big piece is truth. That's been like I mean, you're strong in that. You're like a strong.
I am.
And you're strong internally with that. So I know
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's powerful. So I'm noticing this might be a natural place to close today. It's been really wonderful to see you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to say to me or to anybody who might be listening?
Thanks for listening. If you've been listening, and be gentle with yourself, and go to Amy for counseling, because she's a good lady.
Well, do we want go to whoever you want for counseling, but we do definitely offer a lot of counseling, and we have a whole team. So check us out if you want, for sure. And we'd be happy to support you in any way that we can, because we all have our own life experience that has aided in our ability to provide support, and we all also continue our own work. So we all also see our own counselors and engage in counseling process for ourselves, to maintain, because we'll never be in a place to have it all figured out ever. And the moment we think we have it all figured out, we're sorely mistaken and we need some help.
Right.
But yeah, so come on down if you want to, if you need some support, we're definitely here and available. And then Ryan, thanks again for your time today. And then games night tomorrow night, so 7:00 BC time. And come and check it out. I don't even know what it's going to look like yet. We'll just there might be 8 or 9 of us or something there, and we'll just we'll play a game, a digital game.
It sounds great. It sounds fun.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks again.
Okay, take care, Amy.
Okay, Ryan. Bye.
Okay, bye.